Welcome, beautiful damsels. The greatest victory is that which requires no battle. Sun Tzu, The Art of War, Sigmas. Live by this philosophy. They don't roar on battlefields or rely on brute force. Instead, they dominate from the shadows, confusing and outsmarting their enemies with moves so subtle, they're almost invisible. Here's a fun fact. The human brain spends 95% of its time on autopilot, relying on predictable patterns to function. Sigmas exploit this weakness with a mastery so cunning, it's almost unfair. While everyone else plays checkers, they're reprogramming the board for chess, and then pretending they don't care who wins. So, how do Sigmas manage to leave their enemies scratching their heads, questioning reality, and sometimes even doubting their own intelligence? Stick around. What you're about to read isn't just genius. It's the kind of strategy that makes Bond villains look like amateurs. And let's be honest, who doesn't want to confuse their enemies and look effortlessly cool doing it? Number 1. Psychological inversion tactics. Sigmas are masters of psychological inversion, a tactic that flips their enemies' strategies back on them in ways they never see coming. When an enemy attacks, insults, or undermines them, the Sigma doesn't react emotionally or impulsively. Instead, they turn the attack into a mirror, reflecting the enemy's intentions and weaknesses right back at them. The brilliance lies in the subtlety. It's not about being loud or confrontational. It's about making the enemy's actions work against them. For instance, if someone accuses a Sigma of being selfish, the Sigma might calmly point out how the accusation itself stems from the accuser's own insecurities or unmet needs. This forces the enemy to pause, question their own motives, and even feel exposed. It's not deflection, it's redirection, making the aggressor confront their own flaws without the Sigma having to lift a finger. This tactic isn't limited to personal attacks. Sigmas can dismantle entire strategies by flipping the logic behind them. If an enemy relies on intimidation, the Sigma might feign indifference, nullifying the tactic entirely. If manipulation is at play, the Sigma highlights it subtly, making others wary of the manipulator. The enemy's own moves become their downfall, all because the Sigma refused to play by the usual rules. The beauty of psychological inversion is how effortless it appears. It's not about crafting elaborate schemes, it's about staying calm, thinking 2 steps ahead, and using the enemy's energy against them, like intellectual judo. In the end, the enemy is left confused, frustrated, and often defeated, not by force, but by their own hand. Number 2. Harnessing the power of contradiction. Sigmas are masters of contradiction, using unpredictability as a weapon that leaves their enemies perpetually off balance. They understand that humans crave patterns. Predictability offers comfort and control. By deliberately breaking these expectations, Sigmas create confusion and force their opponents to second-guess every move. One moment, a Sigma might come across as approachable, kind, and even charming, disarming their opponents into believing they're harmless. Then, in the blink of an eye, they switch gears, delivering brutally honest truths or decisive actions that catch everyone off guard. This oscillation between warmth and cold precision makes it impossible for enemies to form a consistent strategy or read their true intentions. This contradiction isn't accidental, it's a calculated move designed to keep enemies on edge. When someone tries to predict a Sigma's behavior, they find themselves chasing shadows. Even allies can find themselves wondering, what's the next move? This unpredictability makes Sigmas dangerous, not because they are reckless, but because they control their contradictions with laser focus. Enemies often make the mistake of underestimating a Sigma, thinking they've deciphered their pattern. That's when the Sigma pulls the rug out from under them, doing something entirely unexpected. Whether it's showing surprising vulnerability or taking an audacious risk, the shift is so sudden and precise that enemies are left reeling. By harnessing contradiction, Sigmas ensure they're never pinned down or boxed into a single narrative. They are, by nature, an enigma. Just when you think you've figured them out, they shatter the image you've built, forcing you back to square one. For Sigmas, unpredictability isn't chaos, it's strategy, and it's the kind of strategy that leaves enemies perpetually outplayed. Number 3. Mastering the art of microaggressions. Sigmas are experts in the art of microaggressions, a subtle yet devastating strategy that destabilizes their opponents over time. These are not the loud, obvious provocations that make headlines. They are the quiet, calculated actions that slip under the radar but leave a lasting sting. The brilliance lies in how insignificant these actions appear on the surface, making them nearly impossible to address directly without the opponent seeming petty or overly sensitive. A Sigma might exploit this tactic with well-timed pauses in conversation, letting silence linger just long enough to create discomfort. Or they might subtly highlight an enemy's minor flaw, not in an overtly insulting way, but with enough precision to plant doubt. These tiny, seemingly harmless remarks or actions begin to pile up, creating a snowball effect that chips away at the enemy's confidence. The power of microaggressions lies in their cumulative impact. One moment, the enemy feels slightly unsettled. After weeks or months, they're questioning their decisions, their competence, and even their perception of reality. Because these provocations are so small, they often go unnoticed until it's too late, leaving the enemy wondering how they got so thoroughly unbalanced. Sigmas wield this technique with the patience of a chess master. They understand that destabilization isn't about a single dramatic move, but about a series of calculated nudges that gradually push their opponents off course. It's not malicious for the sake of malice, it's strategic, a way to disrupt the enemy's focus and exploit their growing frustration. By the time the enemy realizes what's happening, the damage is done. Their composure is gone, their confidence shaken, and they're too distracted to mount a meaningful counterattack. In the hands of a Sigma, microaggressions become a quiet, relentless force that wins the battle without firing a single shot. Number 4. Anticipating moves through nonlinear thinking. Sigmas operate on a different mental wavelength, using nonlinear thinking to stay ahead of their enemies. Unlike linear thinkers who move predictably from point A to point B, Sigmas thrive in the gray areas, connecting dots that others don't even see. This makes their thought process not only unconventional, but nearly impossible to anticipate. A Sigma analyzes their enemy's patterns, motivations, and even subtle cues like tone or timing. But they don't just stop at the obvious connections. Instead, they look for hidden variables, how unrelated factors might influence the situation. For example, where most would focus on what an enemy says or does, a Sigma might pay closer attention to what's left unsaid or undone. These overlooked details provide the Sigma with a broader, more complex understanding of their opponent's strategy. This nonlinear approach often leaves enemies confused. To them, Sigmas appear to make random decisions or take actions that don't align with traditional logic. But in reality, Sigmas are working several steps ahead, crafting a path that their opponents can't follow. They'll anticipate moves by thinking in loops and tangents, weighing possibilities that others dismiss as irrelevant. By the time their enemies realize what's happening, the Sigma has already orchestrated the outcome, often without their opponents even understanding how they lost. Nonlinear thinking isn't just about staying ahead, it's about staying untraceable. Enemies find themselves frustrated and disoriented, unable to match the Sigma's mental agility. It's like playing chess with someone who's operating in 3 dimensions while you're stuck in 2. For Sigmas, this ability to anticipate and adapt is more than a skill. It's their secret weapon, and it's why they rarely lose. Number 5. Disguising strength as disinterest. Sigmas understand the art of playing it cool better than anyone else. They often project an air of disinterest, not because they don't care, but because they know how to use perception as a weapon. This calculated detachment tricks their enemies into believing that the Sigma is either unmotivated or incapable, lulling them into a dangerous sense of superiority. On the surface, a Sigma might seem uninvolved, even dismissive. They won't rush to prove their worth or engage in unnecessary battles. This lack of overt effort convinces enemies that they hold the upper hand, that the Sigma poses no real threat. It's a setup, and the enemies fall for it every time. Behind the scenes, however, the Sigma is quietly assessing, preparing, and sharpening their arsenal. They're not disinterested. They're deliberately biding their time. By the time their opponents figure this out, it's already too late. The Sigma's true strength comes crashing down, completely blindsiding their overconfident enemies. What makes this tactic so effective is how naturally it plays into human psychology. People tend to underestimate what doesn't appear threatening. Sigmas weaponize this bias, knowing full well that once they're underestimated, they hold all the cards. It's not just about surprise, it's about control. When Sigmas finally decide to reveal their capabilities, it's not just a revelation, it's a checkmate. Their enemies, caught off guard and scrambling to respond, often collapse under the weight of their own miscalculation. For Sigmas, feigning disinterest isn't just a defensive move, it's an offensive strategy. It allows them to strike from a position of power while their enemies are left wondering how they could have been so blind. Number 6. Camouflaging intent with contradictory behavior. Sigmas are masters of throwing people off their trail, often by behaving in ways that seem contradictory to their actual objectives. This tactic isn't accidental. It's a deliberate strategy to keep enemies guessing. By presenting themselves in ways that don't align with their goals, Sigmas ensure that their true intentions remain hidden until it's too late. For example, a Sigma might come across as overly accommodating, offering help or advice that seems harmless or even unnecessary. Enemies may perceive this as a sign of weakness or irrelevance, not realizing that it's a calculated move to gain trust or divert attention. Similarly, Sigmas may act deliberately slow or indifferent in certain situations, giving the impression of incompetence or disinterest while quietly working behind the scenes. One of the most disarming tactics is self-deprecation. By downplaying their abilities or mocking their own flaws, Sigmas appear non-threatening, even likable. This creates a false sense of security in their enemies who mistakenly believe they've figured the Sigma out. But when the moment is right, the Sigma reveals their true strength, leaving their opponents scrambling to understand how they were outplayed. This use of contradictory behavior is not just about deception. It's about psychological warfare. It keeps enemies in a perpetual state of confusion, unable to form a clear strategy because they're working with false assumptions. In the end, Sigmas don't just win, they do so while leaving their opponents wondering how they got it so wrong. Number 7. Turning enemies' strengths into weaknesses. Sigmas have a rare ability to turn their enemies' greatest assets into their biggest vulnerabilities. This isn't about brute force, it's about precision and insight. Sigmas study their opponents carefully, identifying the traits, resources, or strategies they lean on most. Then they methodically disrupt or exploit those strengths in ways that leave the enemy reeling. For example, if an enemy prides themselves on being overly confident, a Sigma might feed that arrogance with subtle flattery or small, calculated concessions. This creates a false sense of dominance, leading the enemy to overreach or make reckless decisions. When the moment comes, the Sigma strikes, using the enemy's overconfidence against them. If an opponent relies heavily on resources, a Sigma will find ways to neutralize or bypass them. They might introduce subtle inefficiencies or quietly redirect attention elsewhere, leaving the enemy's key advantages irrelevant. Similarly, if the enemy's strength lies in alliances or influence, the Sigma can subtly plant seeds of doubt or mistrust within their network, causing it to fracture from within. Sigmas excel at reframing perceptions. They can turn an enemy's strength into a liability simply by shifting how others view it. What once seemed like an advantage, such as aggressiveness or control, can be exposed as a weakness when seen in the right context. This ability to weaponize strengths is what makes Sigmas so dangerous. They don't need to overpower their enemies. They simply let their enemies' strengths collapse under their own weight, leaving them defenseless. Number 8. Strategic withdrawal to win the long game. For a Sigma, victory is not about immediate gratification. It's about long-term success. This is why they are unafraid to strategically withdraw from battles or situations that don't serve their ultimate goal. While others might see retreat as a sign of weakness, Sigmas view it as an investment in a bigger, more decisive win. When faced with a challenge, a Sigma will assess whether engaging is worth their energy. If it's not, they'll step back, not in defeat, but in calculation. This withdrawal creates the illusion of weakness, lulling their opponents into a false sense of triumph. Enemies become complacent, convinced they've already won, and stop preparing for further confrontation. Behind the scenes, the Sigma is not idle. They're regrouping, analyzing the situation, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They might use this time to gather resources, build alliances, or identify their opponent's vulnerabilities. By the time they re-engage, they've already stacked the odds in their favor. This approach often catches enemies off guard. While they're busy celebrating their perceived victory, the Sigma is quietly laying the groundwork for a devastating counterstrike. The final blow is not just unexpected, it's overwhelming. Strategic withdrawal isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about choosing battles wisely and refusing to fight on anyone else's terms. For Sigmas, patience and timing are everything. They understand that sometimes the best way to win is to step back, let the enemy exhaust themselves, and then re-enter the game with the upper hand. Number 9. Operating in the shadows to amplify fear. Sigmas understand that visibility can be a liability. By staying unseen and unpredictable, they create an aura of mystery that keeps their enemies perpetually on edge. This isn't just about physical absence. It's about cultivating a psychological presence that's impossible to ignore. Enemies often rely on predictability to form strategies, but Sigmas deny them this luxury. They act sporadically, communicate selectively, and reveal little about their plans. This creates a vacuum of information, forcing their opponents to fill in the gaps with their own fears and assumptions. The result? Paranoia. The genius of operating in the shadows is that it shifts the battlefield into the enemy's mind. They expend energy trying to anticipate moves that may never come, overanalyzing every detail and second-guessing their decisions. The Sigma becomes an omnipresent threat, not because of constant action, but because of deliberate inaction. This tactic also allows Sigmas to observe and learn without exposing themselves. While their enemies flail in uncertainty, the Sigma gathers information, identifies weaknesses, and waits for the perfect moment to strike. When they finally make a move, it's precise, calculated, and devastating. Operating in the shadows isn't about fear for its own sake, it's about control. By staying unpredictable, Sigmas ensure that their enemies are always reacting, never leading. It's a masterclass in psychological warfare, where the absence of action becomes the most powerful weapon of all. Number 10. Seeding doubt in the enemy's ranks. Sigmas are masters at dismantling alliances and creating division within enemy groups. They don't attack head-on. Instead, they plant subtle seeds of doubt that grow into full-blown distrust, causing the enemy's cohesion to unravel from within. This tactic begins with observation. Sigmas study the dynamics of their opponents, identifying key relationships, power structures, and potential fault lines. Once they've pinpointed vulnerabilities, they insert small but powerful suggestions to exploit them. These might come in the form of offhand comments, questions that provoke suspicion, or actions that seem innocuous but create uncertainty. For example, a Sigma might subtly praise one member of a group, making others question their own standing. Or they might draw attention to minor inconsistencies in a leader's decisions, encouraging followers to doubt their competence. The beauty of this approach is that it's indirect. Sigmas rarely get caught as the source of the discord, as the doubt spreads organically. The impact of this tactic is devastating. When trust breaks down, teams fall apart. Members start questioning each other's motives, wasting energy on internal conflicts instead of focusing on external threats. The Sigma, meanwhile, remains in the background, quietly watching as the enemy self-destructs. By seeding doubt, Sigmas turn an enemy's greatest strength, unity, into a crippling weakness. It's a strategy of patience and precision, one that requires little effort but delivers maximum results. In the end, the enemy doesn't just lose, they collapse under the weight of their own mistrust. In the intricate dance of strategy and intellect, Sigmas are the quiet maestros, orchestrating outcomes with a finesse that often goes unnoticed until it's too late. Their brilliance lies not in brute force or loud declarations, but in subtle mastery, turning weaknesses into strengths, confusion into clarity, and chaos into opportunity. Every move they make is deliberate, every moment of inaction a calculated part of a larger plan. They don't merely outsmart their enemies, they dismantle them from within, leaving no trace of their own fingerprints on the outcome. Whether through psychological inversion, seeding doubt, or operating in the shadows, Sigmas prove time and again that power doesn't need to roar. It only needs to strike when the moment is right. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of a Sigma's strategy is their unpredictability. They are enigmas, refusing to conform to expectations or play by anyone else's rules. This ability to remain untouchable, to always stay one step ahead, is what sets them apart. To face a Sigma is to step into a battlefield you cannot see, where every move you make only tightens their grip on the game. In the end, Sigmas remind us that the greatest victories are not always the loudest or the most visible. True dominance lies in the ability to control the narrative, to bend the enemy's will without ever revealing your hand. It's this quiet, unrelenting brilliance that makes them both feared and revered. And as the dust settles, it becomes clear. You don't defeat a Sigma. They allow you to think you had a chance. If you've enjoyed unraveling the brilliant, mysterious strategies of Sigmas and found yourself intrigued, inspired, or even a little amazed, why not stick around for more? This channel is your gateway to unlocking the hidden secrets of power, strategy, and the art of staying one step ahead. Hit that subscribe button and join a growing community of thinkers, leaders, and visionaries who crave knowledge that goes beyond the surface. Don't just watch the game, learn how to master it. Turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss another deep dive into the world of untamed brilliance and calculated genius. Your journey to understanding the extraordinary begins here. Subscribe now and take the first step toward leveling up your mindset and strategy. The next move, it's yours. Thanks, damsels, for tuning in. See you in the next vid. Bye, and stay blessed.